In the vast world of professional wrestling, very few individuals have ever carried the level of power, authority, and sheer influence that Vince McMahon has commanded. For decades, he wasn't just a promoter. He was the architect of modern wrestling entertainment. Under his leadership, WWE transformed from a regional promotion into a global empire, reaching millions of fans across the world. Vince shaped careers, built legends from scratch, and oversaw every single detail, from storylines to character development. Yet behind all the glitz, glamour, and flashing lights, the wrestling business under Vince wasn't always about success stories. It was also filled with grudges, bitter rivalries, and hidden tensions that the average fan never saw. Some superstars rose to the top in spite of Vince's personal dislike, while others never managed to escape the long shadow he cast. In this breakdown, we'll explore the wrestlers Vince McMahon reportedly personally hated the most. These names may surprise you. Some were underdogs, others were top stars, but all of them found themselves on Vince's bad side at one point or another. CM Punk, one of the clearest examples of Vince McMahon's resentment toward a wrestler, is CM Punk to Vince. Punk was nothing short of a snake in the grass. Why? Because from the very start of his WWE career, Punk refused to play the game according to Vince's rules. He didn't want to be scripted, molded, or controlled. He demanded more freedom, more creative say, more money, and above all, more respect. That independence stood in direct opposition to Vince's vision of structure, loyalty, and obedience to the WWE system. Punk was loud, unapologetic, carried himself as though WWE needed him far more than he needed WWE. He proudly wore the voice of the voiceless badge, using promos to openly criticize the very empire Vince built. For a man like McMahon, who prided himself on creating stars, Punk's insistence that he was self-made, a product of the independent wrestling scene, was like a slap in the face. Behind the curtain, Punk's conflicts with both staff and talent only fueled the fire. His blunt public rants made matters worse, highlighting every flaw in Vince's carefully managed empire. For McMahon, Punk represented chaos in a business he fought hard to control, and that was something he could never forgive. Daniel Bryan. Daniel Bryan is another name who never fit Vince McMahon's preferred mold of a superstar. Vince favored giants with 6 feet 3 inches frames, bodybuilder physiques, and Hollywood-style charisma. Bryan had none of that. He was shorter, leaner, and, in Vince's eyes, looked too normal and plain to ever be the face of WWE. McMahon even labeled him a B-plus player, and this wasn't just a storyline insult. It reflected how Vince truly saw him. The problem for Vince was that fans passionately disagreed. The WWE Universe adored Bryan's skill, heart, and underdog spirit. Crowds hijacked live shows, chanting his name and screaming yes, 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 until entire arenas shook with energy. These fan revolts disrupted Vince's carefully planned main events, leaving him no choice but to give Bryan the spotlight. For McMahon, this was a nightmare scenario. His system of controlling who became a star had been shattered by the will of the people. Even after Bryan's early retirement and later miraculous comeback, Vince could never ignore the fact that Bryan succeeded in spite of him, not because of him. To McMahon, that defiance embodied everything he despised. Rey Mysterio is another wrestler who never quite fit into Vince McMahon's vision of a main event star. Standing barely over 5 feet tall and weighing only about 170 pounds, Rey looked nothing like the larger-than-life figures Vince typically pushed to the top. Instead of muscles and brute force, Rey relied on his lucha libre style, flying around the ring with dazzling speed and agility while wearing his iconic mask. To Vince, it made him difficult to accept as a believable world champion. When Rey finally captured the World Heavyweight Championship, his reign felt undermined. Matches were often booked week to week. It's almost as if Vince wanted to remind the audience that Rey wasn't built to carry the company. Even though Mysterio connected with fans of all ages and sold massive amounts of merchandise, McMahon never truly trusted him to be the guy. Beyond the physical differences, Rey's kind-hearted character also clashed with Vince's preferred storytelling style. While Mysterio often forgave those who betrayed him and stayed loyal to his friends, Vince loved stories filled with power struggles, drama, and darker personalities. In the end, Rhee's biggest obstacle wasn't injury or betrayal, it was Vince's unwillingness to fully believe in him. John Cena, the surface. John Cena seemed to be Vince McMahon's perfect creation. For years, Vince called him the ultimate babyface, the ultimate good guy who carried WWE on his back. Cena was adored by kids, respected by parents, and trusted by corporate sponsors, making him the face of the company for over a decade. But underneath the smiles and sponsorship deals, there was tension. Cena had repeatedly pitched the idea of turning heel, especially during his feud with The Rock, but Vince flat out refused. McMahon believed in protecting Cena's image at all costs. To him, turning the company's golden boy into a villain would destroy one of WWE's strongest assets. Years later, however, Cena finally turned heel in a storyline outside Vince's control. And his first promo included something McMahon despised. He used insider wrestling, terms like babyface, and heel directly in front of the audience. Vince had spent decades banning such language, forcing his staff to use superstar instead of wrestler, and even insisting that the word hospital be replaced with local medical facility. He wanted mystery, not jargon. So when Cena broke that golden rule, it was a bitter reminder for Vince that even his most loyal soldier could shatter the image he worked so hard to protect. The Undertaker is often remembered as Vince McMahon's most loyal ally. But even he wasn't immune to Vince's wrath. In his early years, when Taker was still proving himself, he made the mistake of changing a planned finish at WrestleMania against Jake the Snake Roberts. Instead of following the script, he delivered a tombstone on the floor, completely out of view of the live audience. Backstage, Vince erupted with rage. He screamed at Taker for going off script, something McMahon considered the ultimate betrayal. Years later, at WrestleMania 27, a different incident added to Vince's frustration. After defeating Triple H, Undertaker collapsed in exhaustion and had to be carried away. To Vince, this was unacceptable. He believed his phenom should never appear weak, let alone mortal, in front of millions of fans. Watching his most mythical creation look vulnerable felt like a betrayal of the character he worked so hard to build. While Undertaker's loyalty was never in doubt, these moments chipped away at the perfect image Vince wanted to maintain. Bret Hart, perhaps no wrestler represents Vince McMahon's hatred more than Bret the Hitman Hart. The infamous 1997 Montreal Screwjob wasn't just a shocking end to a match, it was the breaking point of their relationship. Bret had been one of Vince's most valuable champions. But when he refused to drop the WWE Championship on McMahon's terms, Vince took matters into his own hands. The bell was rung without Bret's consent. The trust between them was destroyed in front of the entire world. For Vince. Fans blamed McMahon for the betrayal. Wrestlers whispered about backstage politics. Bret carried that bitterness for years. Even when he returned to WWE in 2010, the reunion was uneasy, overshadowed by old wounds. To make things worse, Bret frequently criticized modern WWE stars, openly questioning their abilities in Vince's creative direction. Every time Bret spoke his mind, it reminded Vince of the night he lost control of his company in front of millions. Jeff Jarrett few. Betrayals stung Vince McMahon as badly as Jeff Jarrett's. In Vince's world, loyalty was sacred, but Jarrett shattered that belief the night his WWE contract expired. Scheduled to drop the Intercontinental Championship to China, Jarrett realized he had leverage. If he refused, he could walk straight into WCW with WWE's belt in his hands, repeating the nightmare Vince once suffered when Medusa threw the WWE Women's Championship into a trash can on live TV, knowing Vince was cornered. Jarrett demanded a massive payout, reportedly in the six-figure range, before he would even step in the ring that night. Furious, but with no choice, Vince paid him. Jarrett dropped the belt and then left for WCW the very next day. For McMahon, it was humiliation of the highest order. No one told him what to do, yet Jarrett had outplayed him. When Vince later bought WCW in 2001, he made a point of firing Jarrett publicly on live television, making sure everyone knew the grudge had never been forgotten. Rob Van Dam RVD, was one of the most electrifying wrestlers of his generation. His athleticism, unique style, and innovative moves made him a fan favorite, with crowds chanting his name during every match. But despite his popularity, Vince McMahon never fully trusted him. RVD carried himself with a laid-back, rebellious attitude, treating wrestling as an art rather than strictly a business. This clashed with Vince's vision of discipline and structure. Tensions boiled over multiple times, almost to the point of a physical fight backstage. And when RVD was caught with marijuana while holding both the WWE and ECW championships, Vince saw it as confirmation that he couldn't rely on him as the face of the company. Bruno Sammartino. Bruno Sammartino, one of the most dominant champions in wrestling history, has held the WWF Championship longer than anyone before or since. To fans, he was the ultimate symbol of honor and strength. But to Vince McMahon, Bruno became a thorn in his side. Sammartino represented the old-school era, when wrestling was treated as a pure sport. As Vince shifted the industry into sports entertainment, Bruno openly criticized him. He accused Vince of cheapening wrestling with outrageous storylines, steroid scandals, and prioritizing spectacle over substance. For years, Bruno refused to attend WWE events or acknowledge Vince's version of wrestling. It was personal defiance. McMahon hated it. It wasn't until Triple H stepped in with diplomacy that Bruno finally agreed to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. Even then, the reunion felt strained, with the wounds of past disagreements still visible. To Vince, Bruno wasn't just a critic, he was a constant reminder of an era Vince wanted to bury, yet could never completely escape. Shane McMahon. When Shane McMahon entered the world of WWE, many assumed his path was already written. As Vince McMahon's only son raised inside the business, it seemed inevitable that one day he would inherit his father's empire. To the outside world, it looked like destiny. But behind the scenes, what should have been a smooth transition of power quickly turned into a story of conflict and rebellion. Vince had built WWE by demanding absolute control, and Shane was one of the rare few bold enough to challenge that authority. That alone was something Vince could never truly forgive. The father and son clashed, repeatedly over creative and business decisions. Shane pushed for new ideas, innovation, and bold moves, at one point even suggesting that WWE purchase UFC in the early 2000s. Years before mixed martial arts became mainstream, Vince dismissed the idea outright, mocking his son for not having the financial power to make such a move. That rejection planted seeds of resentment. In 2009, Shane finally walked away, admitting he needed to leave in order to preserve their relationship. But to Vince, his son's departure wasn't about love, it was abandonment. Their fragile bond completely unraveled years later. In 2022, after chaos erupted backstage regarding Shane's booking of the Men's Royal Rumble, Vince made the most ruthless move of all. He fired his own son. It was the ultimate message when it came to WWE. Family ties meant nothing if they threatened the empire Vince had built. Stone Cold Steve? Austin. Few superstars defined WWE's Attitude Era like Stone Cold Steve Austin. In the ring, he was one of Vince McMahon's greatest creations, but outside of it, their relationship was volatile. Austin's persona as the Texas Rattlesnake wasn't just an act, he was outspoken, defiant, and refused to play by anyone's rules. Even Vince's, that rebellious attitude made him beloved by fans. But it also created explosive tension with the man in charge. Their biggest confrontation came in 2003. Vince wanted Austin to lose to Brock Lesnar on free television, believing the shock value would boost ratings. Austin, however, felt the match deserved proper build-up, something worthy of a pay-per-view main event that could generate massive revenue. Instead of compromising, Austin walked out. To Vince, it was betrayal. No one, not even his top star, was bigger than WWE. Though Austin eventually returned for sporadic appearances, the wounds never fully healed. Vince could never forget that his biggest star once took his ball and went home, showing the world that even McMahon could be defied. Becky Lynch. Vince McMahon despised when wrestlers put themselves above the company. And that's exactly why Becky Lynch fell onto his bad side. On-screen, she was the man, a trailblazer who helped usher WWE into a new era of popularity. Off-screen, however, Vince saw someone who didn't always follow his blueprint. The biggest turning point came in 2020, when Becky announced her pregnancy. While she had spoken to Vince about wanting a family, the expectation was that it would happen later, after her main event run cooled off. The timing blindsided the company, forcing WWE to rewrite long-term storylines and adjust championship plans. To Vince, this wasn't just unfortunate timing, it was disloyalty. Proof that Becky valued her personal life over his empire. The tension grew in the ring. In a match against Lacey Evans, Vince gave Becky a direct instruction: sell a punch to make Evans look strong. Becky didn't follow through. To Vince, this wasn't simply ignoring a cue, it was open defiance. A sign she wanted to control her own story rather than trust his. Zack Ryder's story is a textbook example of why Vince McMahon hated when talent succeeded outside of his control. Stuck in the mid-card with little television time, Ryder decided to take matters into his own hands. With only a camera and his creativity, he launched Z, True Long Island Story on YouTube. The show exploded in popularity, attracting thousands of fans weekly and transforming Ryder into a cult hero. Crowds began chanting his name, waving signs, and demanding he receive a push. But there was a problem. This wasn't Vince's idea. In McMahon's world, success had to happen through his system. Ryder had broken the unspoken rule. He reached for the brass ring without permission. Though Ryder briefly won the United States Championship, his reign was cut short. Instead of capitalizing on his organic popularity, Vince booked him as a joke, humiliating him on television. WWE eventually took over his YouTube show, stripping away its originality before canceling it altogether. Ryder's momentum was deliberately dismantled, all because he succeeded without Vince's blessing. Randy Orton, if there was ever a superstar who constantly tested Vince McMahon's patience, it was Randy Orton. From the beginning, Vince wasn't even sure he wanted to sign him. Orton had left the Marines under controversial circumstances, something that clashed with Vince's values of loyalty and discipline. To McMahon, a proud patriot, Randy's early exit was a red flag. It took Jim Ross reminding Vince of Orton's third-generation wrestling heritage to finally secure him a deal. But once in WWE, Randy's immaturity caused endless headaches. At just 22, his temper was legendary. Orton admitted to emotional breakdowns backstage, sometimes even slamming his head against walls in front of Vince. For a man who demanded professionalism, watching one of his supposed future stars unravel like that only deepened McMahon's doubts. Even after Randy became a decorated champion, the clashes continued. At Crown Jewel in 2021, Orton wanted to ride a camel to the ring with his partner Riddle. Vince immediately shut it down, saying it wasn't fitting for Orton's character. No matter how big Orton became, Vince never stopped clashing with him.